I was working in a central London hospital. We were very much a COVID hub. I was moved from a kind of a low-level COVID ward into intensive care. I worked as a nurse for some time because there wasn't enough nurses. I'm not qualified as a nurse. Naturally, my audience were super fascinated by what was going on and terrified and wanted information, and there was a lot of misinformation out there. Like, I got a lot of hate from people when I started vaccinations. I think people often think they are nailing the fundamentals when they're really not, because, you know, the questions that I'll get will be like, you know, I'm experiencing bloating or cravings. What's the best supplement to take? Will collagen help with this? Will CBD oil? And I'm like, you cannot CBD oil your way out of this. Like, you need to go back to the basics. And actually, most of the supplements that are on the market don't work. They're not regulated in the same way as a medicine for safety and efficacy. And so we don't really know if what they have written on the label is accurate and whether it's safe or effective for you to take.
Hazel, how are we?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. We were just laughing at the fact that we have both only recently realised a long weekend was incoming and scrambling to make last minute plans. What are you doing for it? Tell us what your plans are.
It's completely random. So we've left it a bit too late to go anywhere, myself and my boyfriend, but we've decided to just do a weekend of activities, including wine tasting, surfing, but it's like simulated surfing in Bristol, you know, the wave pool.
It's a very fun place to be. Very fun place to be, isn't it?
And a trail run, and then some family dinners and stuff. So I think it'll be a nice weekend.
Very wholesome. Very wholesome. That sounds fantastic, actually. I'm quite jealous because we don't have such exciting things planned, because I only realised 2 hours ago that it was a bank holiday. So anyway, I am very interested to hear about how you've gone against the grain a little bit, because there are lots of medics that graduate in the UK. It's a very sought after position at university, and obviously there's a clear career path that follows. But in 2012, you were studying at Cardiff, medical sciences, and decided to really deep dive into nutrition specifically. Why was that?
Yeah, so if you can't tell by the accent, I'm Irish. I moved over to Wales when I was 18 to study medical sciences with a view to go into medicine, which I did after. And the reason that I wanted to be a doctor in the first place, when I was 14, I lost my father to a stroke. And it was after that moment I decided I wanted to go into healthcare in some shape or form. I wasn't sure whether I would get like enough grades or points to go into medicine, but it was my dream. So I moved across, and I, was hugely passionate in how our lifestyle influences our health. And I think that really stems from the fact that strokes and other forms of cardiovascular disease, while are hugely complex conditions, they are largely driven by how we live our lives, the food that we eat, how much movement we do, the stress that we're under. And I just started medical school that year. So I'd done my 3 years of medical sciences, gone into medicine, was super excited to change the world, and realised that we were just paying lip service to nutrition and these other aspects of lifestyle, and acknowledging they were important risk factors for a multitude of conditions like Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, depression, cancer, but not really learning the fundamentals, like how to practically apply this to a patient should they come through the door. And so that's when I started the Food Medic blog, in a bid to really educate myself. It was more of a personal project in the beginning, and it just really snowballed from there, and I ended up retraining as a nutritionist a lot longer down the line when I'd qualified as a doctor at that point, and it's continued to be my practice ever since, that kind of hybrid doctor nutritionist.
Very sorry to hear about your father at such a young age. I can imagine that must have been really challenging, and it sounds like you really took action, which is a fantastic thing to do, because it's given you the platform that you now have to help have an impact on this issue. But how did you, aside from the educational direction you were going in, what changed with your perspective on health and wellness, and how you were going to personally approach things in the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, like many kids or teenagers, I was in sport at school, and it was something that was really driven by my family that I should take part in. And going into university, I left all of that behind, and doing a medical sciences degree, knowing that I had to get into the top tier to get into medicine. I spent most of my time studying, and if I wasn't studying, I was down the student union necking pints. And my own lifestyle wasn't very healthy. And I think knowing what I knew with my family history, the experience I'd gone through, and the fact that I just got a place at medicine, I had a long, hard look at myself and thought, this is, if I'm going to really push this forward as a passion of mine, I need to embody it too. I did train as a personal trainer at uni to like make some money on the weekends as well. And I just really fully embodied it, I guess, my practice when it came to nutrition, movement, and all aspects of lifestyle. And I actually really believe that it helped to feed into other aspects, like how well I did at university in the long run, because comparing my first degree to my second, it was just, night and day in terms of how I felt. So I think like for me, and for many people who are in this industry, there's often a personal like experience of going from a really dark place to a really good place, and you almost become a little bit preachy in the beginning because you know how good it feels.
Dunning-Kruger to some effect, isn't it? It's we all fall into the trap. But you've already mentioned that the Food Medic started in 2012, and it began as essentially self-discovery education, things you wanted to learn, and essentially write them out online, and whatever happens next happens next. But as things started to develop, what did success start to look like when the cogs started turning in your head? Where did you see it going? What was driving you to put the hours in on top of a very demanding existence? Because medical sciences is amongst the most demanding degree that you can do in terms of contact time in the UK, and I'm sure the world over. Was it something that you saw a viable future in, or was it passion and the desire to have an impact throughout?
I never really, like during my time at medical school, I didn't really see it as something that would be part of my life forever. I think I was just so focused on getting through medicine and doing well, but it was very hard to ignore the community that was building really quickly. I think Instagram launched in 2011, so I was very much one of the first health influencers, let's just say, and most of them were bloggers who had no credentials. So having a degree under my belt and also studying to be a doctor meant that a lot more people were willing to listen and trust my information. And so it grew a lot of traction, and by my final year of medical school, I had a contract for a 2-book deal. And that was I guess that was the moment that I thought, well, I can't really ignore it now. This has become more than just me. And I think at that point, maybe I had like 30,000 or 40,000 followers. So it wasn't huge, but obviously my publisher saw something, and I had to write that first book whilst doing my medical finals. It was like a very hectic 10 weeks. And that was really the moment that it took off, but there was never really any structure or thought process around it becoming like a business or something that I would have a team with or anything. I just thought it would be like a personal project and hopefully inspire some people.
And it's done exactly that, because there have been more books since that original deal, haven't there? But the process of becoming an author in the modern world through social media is something that's much more accessible than it previously was. And you had not trained to, nor had you been educated in becoming an author, yet all of a sudden here was this offer alongside training for your finals in one of the most demanding academic disciplines within the UK. So how did you instinctively respond to the time management and the control of that as somebody that was very conscious of your own health and well-being? Because there's a lot of plate spinning there at an age where I think it's fair to say a lot of people might go into things with blissful ignorance and could get a few things wrong along the way. So what strategies did you employ, and what was the process like?
I think one thing that medicine teaches you to do really well is to prioritize what's the most urgent things. Like when you're working in a hospital, you will be given a list of things, and you're constantly being asked to see different patients, prescribe different things, and you have to act very quickly on your feet and realize what needs my attention the most. And I think I learned that at medical school, and then that I carried through into what I do today, or even writing books and things like that. So I was able to prioritize, but I'm not going to sit here and glamorize it. It wasn't like an easy period. I definitely sacrificed a lot of my social life. I was not like your typical final year student in that I didn't go out and I was just focusing on getting this done because I knew it was a huge opportunity. And yeah, I would just block out time block, and lock myself away. And that was 2015. So I think I maybe had a BlackBerry then, but didn't have like an iPhone, so I probably wasn't on apps like we are now. I sit here and I think how hard it must be to be in university or to be writing a thesis or a dissertation with all of the distractions we have. So at the time, it was easy to just kind of chuck your phone the other side of the room and just crack on, really.
How has it compared writing books recently versus the first time round, given the fact that you essentially are working within your own parameters now? Obviously, you've got businesses, you've got employees to manage, and all these things are going on, but you're more in control than you were with the parameters of a university syllabus. So how is the process of prioritization with books outside of that university setting compared to within?
Yeah, I think book one, I was still a student, so I had no responsibilities apart from passing exams. Now I have to earn a living and also make sure that I pay everyone else's wages. So there's a lot more pressure. And then when you're actually writing a book, it's not like someone's paying you as you go. You're almost like, making it ahead of time, and it's a full-time job. And I think people underestimate how much time goes into it, especially if you're writing a science-based book that needs to be referenced and checked and peer reviewed. Like there's so many different aspects that go into it. And my third book, which is my most recent book, that one was commissioned just before the pandemic, and I'd learned from the other two to actually take some dedicated time to write this. But the 2 days before I went to kind of go on my sabbatical to write the book, I was asked to work as a COVID doctor, and I did that for 2 years. So I just wrote the book after my shifts. I guess like everyone else, it was locked down. I wasn't going anywhere else. But it was the hardest thing I've done because I was going from a very traumatic shift into sitting down and trying to focus on reading papers and put something together because I'd signed a contract to deliver this piece of work. So I don't feel like I finessed the process. I'm still learning how to get it done, but I think going through a book writing process, I feel like it's one of the most challenging things, because you not only have to get facts down, you have to really sell it. You have to be a really good storyteller as well, because unless you're writing a textbook, no one's just going to sit there and read streams of facts.
What was the experience during the pandemic like? Because getting roped in last minute, it wasn't something you had time. Nobody really had time to psychologically prepare for it, but you were very much thrust into a working environment that you hadn't been in running up until that point. So especially given the fact that you had an online presence, did you feel any responsibility to report outwards, to manage people's expectations, to convey severity? How did you as an individual see yourself within being a COVID doctor? Because there's a clear role and responsibility there, but there must have been a bit of a conflict with you as an individual outwardly facing in terms of how to manage that.
Yeah, it was challenging. I mean, I was working in a central London hospital, so I guess compared to other aspects of other parts of the UK, we were very much a COVID hub, and I was moved from a kind of a low-level COVID ward into intensive care. I worked as a nurse for some time because there wasn't enough nurses. I'm not qualified as a nurse, but it was just kind of like all hands on deck. So I had a choice. I didn't need to work, but I felt like an obligation, and it was an important time to muck in. But naturally, my audience were super fascinated by what was going on and terrified and wanted information. And there was a lot of misinformation out there. So my Instagram page almost just became a diary of what I was doing and trying to share as much up-to-date information. And myself and a lot of other doctors who work in the media, we would have briefing calls with the Department of Health so that we did have the most up-to-date information to share with our audiences, which is challenging in itself because it was such a heightened state of like emotion between everyone. Like I got a lot of hate from people when I started vaccinations. I got like, a lot of people who were just expressing their frustration and emotion towards the NHS because maybe they were struggling and didn't feel like their health needs were being met. So it was hard to navigate, and no one really knew what the best way forward was. We were just kind of trying our best and doing our best.
How strong was the desire coming out the other side to really hone in on the passion, which was the nutrition side of things? Because I can imagine you must have felt a bit deprived in terms of that regular cadence of having the impact that you had chosen to move towards. So what happened next when you came out of being a COVID doctor and really things started to snowball aggressively, didn't they, in terms of just growth, TV, consultancy, everything that followed? Your opinion on matters is very, very high level, and that is a highly desirable thing that people want to engage with. So how did you manage coming out the other side with so much opportunity, but so much, I can imagine, restricted passion to share with the world?
Yeah, I didn't get out of bed for like 2 weeks after I had finished. I decided to take time out and then ultimately decided to move away from the NHS completely last year to go all in on the food medic and everything that I'm doing as kind of in my consultancy roles. That was a really hard move because I've always like identified as a doctor in scrubs in the NHS as opposed to just, I guess, someone who runs the food medic, who's an author, presenter, podcaster. And that opened up a lot of doors and freed up my time to do more things. And now like I, sit on the advisory board for Whoop and other firms like that. I'm able to expand the work that we do in the food medic. We've turned it into a membership platform and working on building courses. And it's really given me a lot more passion and drive. And I kind of feel like it's more, when I talk about the food medic, I talk about it like it's my vocation, but I really do feel like it is. Like losing my father was probably the most significant and harrowing event that I've ever gone through. But it hasn't happened. I feel like it's happened for a reason. And it's it might feel a bit strange to say that something so terrible would have a silver lining, but I think this is why I do what I do.
I view that sort of reflection in a very similar way, actually, because I've experienced personal trauma in my life, and the obvious thing to say is that it's very unfortunate, therefore I wish it hadn't happened. But everything that's happened since that moment onwards, we have been a reflection of the circumstances in which everything followed. So unfortunate circumstances are unavoidable. It's kind of what happens next that defines how the person responds to it. And I think you're a shining example of what happens that comes from taking action out the back of something else. And whilst I can imagine in a million worlds over you'd never wish that was the case, you can be proud of the growth and development that's come from reflecting on the negative experience and how that can actually manifest outwardly to others. And that's something that, as you mentioned already, advisory seat to Whoop, there's TV work, there's books, there's everything going on. There's a lot of plates spinning, and you've come from a very high pressure environment and moved into another one. So how do you as an individual hold yourself accountable to the things, because it's something I struggle with as well, how do you hold yourself accountable to the things that you outwardly project and look after yourself from a psychological and a physical point of view? Because you run your own businesses, you have staff, it's easy to just prioritize the thing in front of you and not make time for yourself. So how do you manage?
I think I'm still trying to figure that one out. The nice thing about going into a place of work where you're employed is that you have like a start time and an end time. But when you work for yourself, those lines get blurred. And if you work from home, that's even more blurred. So I think having set times that I work during the day and being really clear on my boundaries, when I'm kind of booking calls, and if I'm working with clients that are in the US and stuff, making sure it's not feeding into 11 p.m. at night over here, because that does really eat into everything else. It eats into your sleep, which then has a knock-on effect on your training and how you eat. And then ultimately you don't feel like a fully functional human who can do the best job. And so if I can keep all my fundamentals and all the basics standardized across the week, make sure I'm eating well, moving well, sleeping enough, and socializing and kind of feeding into my relationships, then everything else just falls into place. But I don't get it right all the time. Sometimes I'm still working on a Sunday, and my goal for the end of the year is to have absolute complete weekends off. Which for some people, they might be like, well, you work for yourself, you just don't work. But when you're building something up from the ground, yourself, sometimes it is on the weekends that you have to get the work done. So it's not a perfect process, but I'm definitely starting to put things in place so that I can be protective of my mental and physical health.
Imperative. And it's funny that you mentioned Sundays, because the week just gone, have taken the decision to abandon Sunday evenings as my YouTube upload day, even though it's the most optimal time to do so, because it is the one thing that stops me from making myself try and put my phone in a separate room all day on Sunday, because I need to upload it, share it, stay around the comments for a little bit, which means I'm kind of glued to my phone every Sunday evening, and have been like that for 2.5 years. Yeah. And it's got to the point now where I know I need Sundays. I hate my phone. I hate my phone by the end of the week. Yeah. And if I'm drawn into it, because there's no reason to not engage with it on a Sunday, because I'm going to be engaging with it at 7 p.m. for that YouTube upload. So I've moved it to Monday, and as of this weekend onwards, fingers crossed, I can completely ignore my phone on Sundays. So as you said, it's difficult to do, but I've kind of been punched in the face enough by how I feel coming into Monday when the cycle resets, that again I've had to take action to try and look after myself a little bit better, even though if you looked at it purely rationally and logically, for the business, for ticking boxes, for getting as much as you can done, you'd keep doing it. But from an internal psychological personal health point of view, I've taken the decision to experiment. You never know. I might ruin this by 7 a.m. on Sunday morning, but we'll see.
Everyone will keep you accountable now.
Yeah, I've said it now. It's nowhere to hide. But with that in mind, there's a lot of really wide-reaching and applicable advice you give to people from all backgrounds, which I think is fantastic. And you make things very digestible, because I've heard you say that essentially you can understand the research so that other people can access the information that they need to, which is a lot of what nutrition doesn't necessarily do online. And a lot of your books have been focused on empowering women and female health specifically, which is something I'm obviously not as clued into as your audience might be. But with that in mind, with my ignorance, with potential listeners' ignorance in mind, and the assumptions that are made in the fitness industry, which is generally quite painted with a broad brushstroke, what are the biggest considerations and highlights from your perspective in differences between men and women when it comes to really looking after our health in the modern world?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think something that more and more research is emerging, because for a very long time, whether it's in health and fitness or medicine or like biomedicine, we've always seen kind of the male body as the default body, and so most of our research historically has been based on a male body and just extrapolated to a female body as a smaller version of a man. And we both know that's obviously not true for various reasons, anatomically, physically, and physiologically. The main kind of key difference there being our hormone profiles. And so what we're learning is that, because we've disregarded women for a very long time, we're starting to learn more about how our menstrual cycle influences our strength and performance, or our nutritional needs, or how we sleep. Even our sleep architecture can be changed by where you're at in your cycle. And that's similar, for example, if you're going through the menopause or during pregnancy. We see all of these changes because across a lifespan, men tend to have pretty stable hormone levels, but women go through these key hormonal milestones, and those milestones are like windows of vulnerability where you're more at risk of insomnia or mental health issues or gut issues. And only now are we starting to understand this. But for a very long time, if a woman presented with a physical problem that we couldn't explain, the diagnosis would be, oh, you're anxious, it's all in your head. And there's lots of research to actually back that up, to say that for the same physical problem, women are more likely to be diagnosed with a psychiatric condition than a man, and for physical problems are more likely to be prescribed antidepressants. And like, when you really put that down in black and white, it's very sinister. But it's this idea that, you know, women are making it up. It's kind of hysterical. It's all in her head. And I was starting to piece that together as a doctor in my own practice. You know, even when it came to how women present with heart attacks and things like that. And that was why I decided to write The Female Factor. And as a woman and a doctor to women, I was very frustrated. And this kind of started as more of an activist book, but I wanted it to be very practical. And so I've distilled it into the 4 pillars of lifestyle, or the 4 main pillars, which are nutrition, movement, mood, and sleep. And just chat about how that differs for a woman across her lifespan, whether she's going through the menopause, through pregnancy, or across the cycle. And so a lot of that feeds into health and nutrition and fitness. And I do see an interest in the fitness space when it comes to that. But I think the risk there is that we don't have a huge amount of research, and a lot of it is just emerging and conflicting. And I see people grab a sentence from the book and say, this is how you're absolutely going to feel at this part of your cycle, and so you have to train in this way. And it's not that way. And I think while hormones and our menstrual cycle have an influence, the biggest influence is our individual variability and how you feel in yourself. So I'm a huge advocate of tracking your cycle and understanding, but I'm not about creating prescriptive recommendations for men versus women, because there are important changes, but I think we're largely more the same than we are different. And that still holds true.
It's a fascinating way to look at it, because I think that is the biggest mistake, generally speaking, in the fitness industry. And unfortunately, in an era of shorts, TikTok, Reels, the more prescriptive and pithy you can be, the better you'll do, which has created a space for the Liver King to thrive, for example, because you have such a short window to grab people's attention saying, it depends, and here's an explanation as to why. Nobody's going to watch that. So from a commercial point of view, it's difficult to actually disseminate information when it isn't prescriptive, because people want quick answers, don't they? So it's fascinating to hear that as refreshing as it can be to find people in the industry that accept the individual nuances of the individual, but what that then forces is action from the individual. And that's where there's an ecosystem of structures, habits, pillars, as you've said, structures that are required for people to be able to work within. So you live in London, busiest city in the UK, lots going on, lots of people making a lot of mistakes. What are the recommendations that you would give in general terms for people to better consider how they in their own lives can improve their 4 pillars? What do they need to look at, assess, to be able to take action in their own lives?
Yeah, well, I think like the pillars that I've used in the Female Factor are the pillars that we use on the Food Medic platform as well. So it's applicable to kind of anyone really. Movement, sleep, stress. Movement, sleep, stress, and sleep are the kind of like 4 core areas that I would encourage anyone to look at. Obviously there are other areas like alcohol and smoking, but we'll just take those 4 pillars. When someone's starting or like embarking on a fitness journey, it's very easy to look at all of those things and feel very overwhelmed and think that you need to tackle all of them at once. What I get people to do is prioritize on a list what they think that they've nailed versus what they're lacking on, and start with the one that they're lacking on first, and then they can build on the rest. Because the chances are, like when it comes to behavior change, if you've got more than one thing to do, you're less likely to stick to it. So making it really small and simple. And again, this advice isn't new or groundbreaking or sexy at all, and it probably won't go viral on TikTok, but it's the most important and it's the most evidence-based, and we know it works. So yeah, it's the best thing to focus on. And I think if you are someone who menstruates and you've got a menstrual cycle, then you can map your cycle on top of those four things. And so across your cycle, start tracking how your mood is. If you've like certain cravings for food, if you're training slow, or if you feel like super strong on a particular point in your cycle, and how you're sleeping, and you'll soon like see those patterns come into play.
Which begs the question, you're on the advisory board for Whoop,
Yeah.
and whilst I'll probably wiggle this into an ad integration somehow, where do you see the role of wearable technology in this? Because I know it's something that you're actively involved in forwarding, but there's a lot of cynicism left, right and centre from maybe people that have taken information online, because people can view things as the gospel. They can view things in binary terms. And I have a very clear line of engagement with how I use Whoop, which is essentially it's another information point from which you can make more informed decisions. Whereas there are people out there that view MyFitnessPal, that view Whoop, that view other trackers as, I've woken up at X% recovery, therefore today is going to be a bad day. And that's where the psychological complications can come in, which make the actual broader narrative of what is the long-term potential of wearable technology a little bit blurry and potentially in some camps somewhat cynical. So given that you are right in amongst it at a top level, and you are a huge advocate for tracking and monitoring these things from a broader health point of view, what do you think the things are that people can be doing now with the technology that's accessible? And more excitingly, what do you think the long-term developments that can happen that will really help people level this up?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that I'm thinking about a lot, and obviously having conversations within Whoop and their other kind of scientific advisors. It's fascinating to see how much they're driving things forward. I think one of the reasons that I was really keen to get involved with Whoop is they're not afraid to say that they're not perfect yet, or that it's just a tool, and that you're kind of, you know, how they educate people around it is very much like this should inform you or guide you. They talk about being a coach as opposed to like, it's not prescriptive, it's not, you know, I definitely take it with a pinch of salt and take it as part of everything else. But what I think the most interesting thing is moving forward is obviously the technology will be more advanced, but we can collect so much data from people, from these fitness trackers, that help us inform how our behaviors influence our health, how our behaviors influence our sleep. Now Whoop and other trackers are integrating things like the menstrual cycle, so we're learning through users how their strength changes, how their sleep architecture changes, all of these things that, you know, if we were to run a study, it would cost a lot more. We'd have to recruit people. It would take years to collect the data that we're able to collect from people's wrists every single day and look back retrospectively. Of course, there's gold standard ways of collecting evidence, but this is such a useful tool to just get a snapshot and understand what's happening. And I guess because my interest is largely in women's health, that's the part I'm driving in Whoop. Like, I want to know what happens to your physiology when you go through the menopause or when you're pregnant. And, you know, I think with these trackers as well, it will give us early indications when someone's unwell. Like, for example, if someone was at risk of having a stroke because their heart rate's changing, their blood pressure, all of these things. Before, we would never have that. And I think, you know, I hope in the future that we will have these integrations into public healthcare systems, and your doctor will be able to look at your tracker and see, you know, if we integrate this into your program, for example, if we're like using a medication or a lifestyle intervention, what will that do to your heart rate? How will that change your levels? I do think there's like, obviously there's some drawbacks to trackers, and like you said, it doesn't tell you the full picture, and for some people they can get very obsessed with the numbers. Like, if you've got sleep anxiety or anything to do with like numbers, like causes you anxiety, I definitely don't recommend you get a tracker, because you will become obsessed. But for me, now that I've been using Whoop for long enough, even if my recovery is maybe not where I'd like it to be, I'm not going around thinking that, oh, I'm going to feel super lethargic today, I can't train. yes, I take it into consideration, but I'm not letting it completely dictate my day. And I think that's the important thing to bear in mind.
Agreed. But also that it can be a very useful tool in a broader toolbox of things with which you can make more informed decisions on your health and well-being.
For sure. Like, I think the biggest thing for me is how my behaviors influence my sleep. And I know that even if I have like 1.5 glasses of wine, I will have red recovery. Like, it's like alcohol just does not go well with me. Or if I have caffeine after 2 p.m, like then I know that my sleep will be broken. And it's funny because you start like piecing together these things, and then because I'm aware of it now and I've seen the numbers, I'm less likely to do it.
I've found, because we all know alcohol will ruin our sleep. We know this, but we'll still have 1.5 glasses of wine and think, oh, this is terrible. But believe me, I am no saint when it comes to this. But I think what really reinforces the action is when you see the wearable tell you this is why you feel the way that you do, and then you take action to change that, and then actually feel an output or some sort of tangible benefit to taking that forward action. That's when the pattern of behavior is actually reinforced. Whereas I think people almost fall one step short, where they think, oh, this thing is bad for me, okay, and then almost nothing really follows. And I think that's where maybe the tool is being misused or maybe misunderstood by some. And I think it's just important to reinforce that it has a place in a person's lifestyle, but it's not a direct replacement for an understanding of a person's lifestyle, because unfortunately we're not yet at Black Mirror level of data on our wrist with front-facing display in front of our eyeballs and glasses. But who knows, maybe Elon will get us in that direction at some point. You never know, we might have plans in the background. But with all that in mind, if budget was limitless, you didn't have any other things to worry about, and you could don a white lab coat, is there a study that you would love to lead and explore? If all of the variables that prevent complicated studies from happening were removed, what would that study be?
That is such a good question. I think the areas that interest me the most, and I feel like is quite untapped, is how nutritional needs vary between men and women, because we've got very few studies on this. And when it comes to controlling for hormones across the menstrual cycle, you can guesstimate where a woman is based on kind of time in her cycle in days, but really you should be doing measurements of hormone levels to map it out correctly. So it's never really been done. So I would love to really understand that more, understand like whether we can like optimize things like energy levels, reduce PMS symptoms through nutrition. Like at the moment, I can give my best recommendations based on the evidence that we have, but I would love to do a bit more in that. And also on the sleep side of things, I think sleep is often very, very much overlooked as a complete key pillar of health when it comes to full body metabolic health and hormone levels and everything, even growth hormone. Like we just very much overlook it when we're looking at our health. We think it's a passive thing that almost we sacrifice in replace of getting to the gym early or doing other things, when really I think a lot more people could do with focusing on that before the other things.
It's there's a real habit in the fitness industry currently, especially with the buzzword quote unquote recovery, where there's a lot of focus on the grain of sand at the top of the pile of sand rather than the pile of sand itself, which I think, in terms of pillars, I think the biggest mistake, generally speaking, is people not building in recovery mechanisms and actually adequate or not too much volume in the first place, to therefore feel that the 1% add-on is going to then bring them back from the proverbial dead in this case. And I think that's where a more holistic view of stressors out with the training program, stressors out with the data, stresses out with the logical evidence-based understanding, because there is a human being behind all of that output. And an argument with your boss one day, an argument with your partner the other, a bill coming through that you didn't expect, but in Bank of England base rates going up again. There's a lot going on in the world that can really send stress in different directions, and that'll affect our sleep, which might make us have 1.5 glasses of wine. It might make us not see our friends on the weekend, and then before we know it, then we're in this state that we hadn't accounted for when it came to putting the training program together, and that means that 60 minutes on the watt bike or the assault bike that Tuesday evening might actually be the thing that pushes us over the edge a little bit, and that's where I think platforms like yours that encourage a much more holistic overview of the individual behind the data in every sense of the word is very important, because I think we try and look at things from a health point of view as too binary, and that forces a desire for quick answers, no sense of delayed gratification, and a desire for complexity where there needs to be none, because as you've said, there's a real simplicity to the pillars that you use with the membership community and in the books. And if you're nailing those, then the grains of sand at the top of the pile of sand are nice to haves, but they're not going to be the make or break on how you feel on a day-to-day basis, are they?
No, I completely agree with you. I think people often think they are nailing the fundamentals when they're really not, because the questions that I'll get will be like, I'm experiencing bloating or cravings. What's the best supplement to take? Will collagen help with this? Will CBD oil? And I'm like, you cannot CBD or oil your way out of this. Like, you need to go back to the basics, and it will often be something about just dialing back nutrition and looking at what you're eating as opposed to what you can add in on top. And when you really look at the research to do with supplements, a lot of people take them just out of, not because they really understand what it's going to do for them or because they've got a specific issue, but they take it for an insurance policy because they think it may make them better, and they think more is better when it comes to vitamins and minerals. And actually, most of the supplements that are on the market don't work. They're not regulated in the same way as a medicine for safety and efficacy. And so we don't really know if what they have written on the label is accurate and whether it's safe or effective for you to take. And I'm not saying that no supplement in the world works. I'm just saying that the supplement industry is the wild, wild west, and you cannot... I just wouldn't put all my money in it or put all my eggs in the supplement basket. I would focus on everything else. And then if you need to supplement, that's your grain of sand on the top of the pile.
If we were to strip things right back, you've managed to interact with, engage with, comment on thousands of people over the years, tens of thousands, I'm sure, and you will have a very good broad brushstroke. I know we've just said don't paint things with a broad brushstroke, but we're gonna distill it down to some values. If, from what you've observed in the world in general, because you've been in fitness and you've been in the NHS and you've had a really good perspective on things, what are the core values that people should focus on in the modern world with their nutrition? What are the things that they should be doing that stop them from getting to the point where they feel that they can CBD oil their way out of a situation, which is an overly common thing to believe you can do these days? But the values that underpin all of that, what are the mistakes you see people making most of the time, and what are the considerations that might help them improve there?
I think chasing down what they think needs to be an overly complex thing, and again, like, it's the very unsexy basic advice that still holds true, and that's like a regular balanced diet. I think demonizing food groups has never gotten anyone to a good place. If you have intolerances or allergies, yes, like, remove those foods from your diet. But if you don't, it's generally in your best interest to include all of those food groups in the right balance. I think moving towards a more diversity and variety of plant-based foods is definitely a trend that's worth getting on, because we know that your gut microbiome has far-reaching effects to your health beyond your gut, in terms of like your brain health, even how it regulates your hormones, your mood, your brain health. It's one of those fads, I think, that is not faddy. It's something that is definitely important. I think opting for more sustainably, locally farmed foods where possible is definitely better for you and for the planet, and from a nutrient perspective. But beyond that, it's making sure that you are kind of hitting all those key processes, having a varied diet, making sure you're getting adequate protein at each meal. And and that would be it. And making sure that your diet's enjoyable and doesn't feel restrictive towards you. Because I think one of the things that we often forget is that even when it comes to like our diet, and we talk about the Mediterranean diet being the most important diet or the most healthy diet out there, a lot of that diet is based around the principles of the Mediterranean style of eating, and that's eating with kind of friends and family at a meal, slowly over an hour, and everything else that goes around it, like cooking seasonal food and locally produced foods. Whereas now most of our meals are eaten at a desk, inhaled within 5 minutes. We're not really considering what food's going in. We're still hungry an hour later because we've not taken the time to digest that food, and we're in this hyper-stressed space. So it's not just about what we eat, it's about how we eat and who we're eating it with. And if you can, where possible, try eat away from your desk, try be mindful about what you're eating. And the social kind of community side of things are important as well.
And none of that's new, is it? I think that's the beautiful simplicity to it. Is we've tried to reinvent the wheel for so many years that we're back to the original wheel. But I think it's difficult to wade through the uncertainty as a relative novice to the information. It's difficult to wade through the uncertainty. So that clarity is very useful, and people have lots of books to choose from if they would like more information from your perspective. But with everything we've discussed in mind, what does long-term success look like for you as an individual, from a personal point of view and from a professional point of view?
That's a great question, and I feel like something that's difficult to answer in a succinct way. But one of my core values is freedom, in terms of time and location. And what I would love to do is try to be a bit more flexible with my work in terms of the days that I'm working, and also where I'm working. So I'd love to do a bit more travel. It's, I guess, having been in university for 8 years and then in the NHS for 6 more, I've got a bug to see more of the world and explore. So for me, like, success would be having a business that I'm able to work from wherever I want in the world and that will still thrive. But also personally being able to fulfill that like goal of mine to see more of the world.
They're nicely intertwined as well, which is great, isn't it? So you're already many steps along the roadmap of freedom because you're already managing to merge those two without too much distinction, which is great. So it's been a fascinating conversation, Hazel. Thank you very much. And if people want to find more about what you're up to, where to go for more information on all of your books, the insights you can share, where would you like them to go?
It's very simple to find me. Every platform is The Food Medic. So our website's thefoodmedic.co.uk, podcast, same name, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, just The Food Medic's the best handle. And we've got links to my books and things like that on the website. So it's all in one place. Easy.
And your travel, the value of travel and freedom to Bristol to ride waves this weekend is just around the corner. So you're very much practicing what you preach, which is great. So thank you again, and look forward to catching up soon.
Thank you. Thanks so much.